Let's talk about the fight over the South China Sea. It's rich in oil and gas, there are loads of fish, and the shipping lanes are some of the busiest in the world. China wants control of it.
坚持以对话弥合分歧，以谈判化解争端。我们不追求一枝独秀。
But other countries say they have rights to it too. And the Americans, well, they have trade routes through there worth hundreds of billions of dollars.
The U.S. has been committed to the idea of freedom of the seas, and nowhere is that under greater threat than in the South China Sea.
So what's behind China's claim over these waters? Why won't it share? And could it all lead to war? China has been a land-based power for millennia, so it's never had much of a navy, not like the colonial powers, nor has China needed one until now. Today, China wants to be a naval force across two oceans, the Indian and the Pacific. That's to make sure it can trade with the rest of the world and get enough oil and gas to drive its economy. And to do that, Beijing wants to control the South China Sea. But there's a lot of competition. Taiwan, for one, claims many of the same rights that China does. Then there's Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. They want to protect their turf, whether it's rights to islands, seabed oil, or fishing grounds. Indonesia's in there too, and the Americans, they want to protect those valuable shipping lanes. So no shortage of players. The question is, how is this all going to be resolved?
There are three futures for the South China Sea. The one that it looks headed toward now is, of course, China will just get Southeast Asian countries to sigh and accept its claims. The one that everybody really wants to avoid is a conflict.
And then there's the third option, which involves pushing some kind of compromise between China and its neighbors. Countries like Taiwan and others that are members of ASEAN have tried. But no one expects that to go anywhere anytime soon, because China knows what it wants, and it's been working towards that for a long time. We're talking about China's 9-dash line. Back in 1929, the Chinese took a bunch of old British sailing charts and told cartographers to draw China's borders. One of them drew 9 dashes around the entire South China Sea. And as far as the Chinese were concerned, that was that.
Over the last 70 plus years, the line's taken on a life of its own. And in Beijing, at least, the meaning has steadily expanded so that today, China's not just claiming the islands inside it, it's claiming all the waters, all the seabed, all the airspace.
So then in 2013, China added a 10th line to take in Taiwan. Its appetite seems to be growing. It's easy enough to understand why China wants control when you look at the numbers. Around 40% of the world's liquefied natural gas passes through the South China Sea, from the Gulf, through the Indian Ocean, and onto places like China. The amount of trade that sails through there is worth $3 trillion a year, 1/3 of the world total.
Being able to control this waterway, what we normally call the sea lines of communication, is extremely important for China.
So there's an expression in Latin that goes, if you want peace, prepare for war. Now, China has no immediate interest in war, but it wants to ensure its access to the South China Sea if it comes to that. In the west, the main shipping lane from the Indian Ocean narrows to just 3 kilometers, and it's surrounded by American allies. In the east, there's Taiwan, which has tons of American weapons and could block China from getting to the Pacific. So to help stake its territorial claim, China has planted its flag on contested islands that are in those waterways. In the Paracels, China's built a bunch of outposts, while in the Spratlys, it's added over 13 square kilometers of reclaimed land since 2013. And turned them into military bases.
The militarization of the South China Sea has grown rapidly over the last 5, 6, 7 years. It has come to a point where it's unacceptable for the United States.
It may be unacceptable to the Americans, but neither the Obama nor the Trump administrations are seen to have accomplished much. The US's main way of asserting navigational rights and freedoms is having its navy sail through the South China Sea. It also conducts military exercises in the region, sometimes with warships from France, Japan, and Australia in the Bay of Bengal. In July, things got a bit hairy. The Chinese and Americans both held naval exercises in the South China Sea.
Worsening tensions between China and the United States.
The U.S. sailed in with 2 aircraft carrier strike groups.
It's the first time Washington sent 2 carriers for drills in the area since 2014.
And the Chinese accused the Americans of escalating things. Before the US elections, the Trump team gave it one last shot, with mixed results.
Don't let the Chinese Communist Party walk over us. You should have confidence that America will be here in friendship to help you.
美国才是本地区和平稳定的破坏者和麻烦制造者。
What everyone's been trying to do is get China to obey the law, namely the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The law establishes what are called exclusive economic zones. These extend 200 nautical miles out from a country's coastline, regardless of whether it's the mainland or an island. And China signed up to that law.
All of the world came together, including China, in the 1970s and negotiated the current regime of maritime law, which says everybody gets the same set of maritime claims. China's claims don't fit within that framework.
So the Philippines did the only thing it could. It took China to court. One of the big issues was fishing rights.
For millions of Filipinos living in coastal communities like this one, food security is at the heart of the South China Sea dispute.
In 2013, the Philippines argued that China had no right to the Scarborough Shoal. It filed a case against the Chinese with an international tribunal at The Hague.
China! China! China!
Judges ended up siding with the Philippines. Remember China's territorial claim based on that 9-dash line? Well, in 2016, the court concluded that it's invalid.
When after China lost a landmark arbitration case before the Philippines, Beijing realized that the best way to divert attention from that and avoid diplomatic blowback would be to show some progress.
Since the 1990s, ASEAN, that association of South Asian countries, has tried to cobble together a code of conduct for the South China Sea. The idea was to control China's ambitions. China hadn't shown much interest in a code back then, but after losing the case with the Philippines, the Chinese started to push for one, though some in ASEAN questioned China's motives.
Honestly and unfortunately, I don't think there is any fertile ground for reaching an agreement.
It's not trying to solve anything, right? The Code of Conduct will not say who owns what rock. It won't say whose maritime claims go where. It's meant to manage dispute.
There's another problem. Not everyone in ASEAN is eager to offend a country as powerful as China.
Certain members of the grouping, particularly Cambodia, but also Laos, at times Thailand, have really no desire to irritate China. And so this means a whole heck of a lot to 4 of the members, 5 maybe, and almost nothing to the other 5. And that's a recipe for no progress.
Vietnam has repeatedly butted heads with China over their competing claims.
The last time there was a real talk was in Dalat, Vietnam, and the Vietnamese delegation blew up the whole process because they were so angry over recent harassment of oil and gas operations by China that had gone on at the same time. So they'll say that there's progress. I would encourage everybody to take that with a giant grain of salt.
This year's ASEAN Summit was hosted by Vietnam, and a lot of it by video because of the pandemic. But the social distancing wasn't expected to help delegates reach any agreements on the South China Sea.
We express serious concern over ongoing developments that infringe on the lawful rights of littoral countries.
The problem with the South China Sea is that it's vast and the stakes are high. There are a lot of heavily armed countries defending their interests there. And China's Coast Guard, as well as Chinese militia using fishing boats, often cause confrontations on the open sea. Many analysts worry about all of that provoking a military response from someone. But strangely enough, the whole dispute also sort of just bubbles away under the radar.
The South China Sea is so insidious. It is hard to keep attention on it, not just within Washington, but all of the other global partners and allies. Somebody is always going to be distracted or find it not all that important.
The Chinese see the South China Sea as essential to their survival. Thing is, it's important to everyone there. That's why this whole dispute isn't going away. But China's been around for thousands of years. If anyone's good at playing the long game, it's China. As with all our Start Here episodes, this primer is to get us started, but there's a lot more information out there to help us understand what's going on in the South China Sea. As always, subscribe wherever you're watching this video, and I'll see you next week.